Hello, everybody. Dr. Petri here. Welcome to Lecture 3 on World War I. Today we are going to talk in depth about the German advances, what they did after they remilitarized and violated the Versailles Treaty. We'll talk a little bit about American foreign policy between 1932 and 1941, which is when the U.S. entered the war after the bombing of Pearl Harbor. We'll talk about how Germany invaded France. We'll talk about the world-famous Battle of Britain. We'll talk about Germany invading Russia and starting a two-front war. We'll talk about Japanese aggression. We'll get into Pearl Harbor and the U.S. declaring war. So, grab your pens, grab your paper, and get ready to listen and write. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland. 2 days later, England and France declare war on Germany. Within a month, Germany had all of Poland under its control. The invasion reflected a new military strategy known as the Blitzkrieg, which literally means lightning war. That's where the Nazis used fast-moving planes and tanks for an initial attack, followed by a massive invasion of ground troops. By mid-September, Stalin had sent troops to occupy the eastern half of Poland. England and France did not have the military might to counterattack Hitler from the west, so instead a British expeditionary force of 4 divisions was sent to help fortify France in September. From 1930 to 1934, France had constructed a series of linked, heavily armed fortifications along its border with Germany. This is known as the Maginot Line. The French generals believed that this defensive super trench would keep the country safe from Nazi attack. No military action occurred between the fall of 1939 and the spring of 1940. The Allies waited for Hitler to make his next move. This period came to be called the Phony War, and although a state of war existed, no fighting took place. Then, in April 1940, Hitler launched another surprise attack, this time on Denmark, Norway, and Holland. German troops then moved through southern Belgium into France, bypassing the Maginot Line and splitting the British and French forces. This maneuver left British troops trapped on the beaches of Dunkirk, just across the English Channel from England, though through an extraordinary boat lift that involved both military and civilian craft, the British managed to rescue the troops from Dunkirk, but not their equipment. So, on the map here, you can see Germany, and here is the Maginot Line in France, where they thought they wouldn't be able to be attacked. But again, Germany goes into the Netherlands, through Belgium, and totally averts the Maginot Line, and is able to attack from this direction. Just like the Schlieffen Plan. It's like the Schlieffen Plan 2. So this was the area that Germany remilitarized in 1936. This tiny little country here is Luxembourg, and this is the Netherlands. This is where Denmark and Holland are. Denmark's up here. Holland is right here. This is where Amsterdam is. And Germany just marched right around the Maginot Line and attacks France in this region. So you can also see on the eastern border, here's where Germany and Russia had made a plan. Russia's going to take the east half, this half of Poland, and Germany's going to take the west half, this half of Poland. And you can see that Hitler occupies Czechoslovakia. He invades and occupies Czechoslovakia in 1939. Poland is conquered by Germany in September of 1939. And this area, known as White Russia, is taken by the Soviet Union in September of 1939. So the German advance is fast and mighty. And why didn't the Americans react to this? Why didn't the Americans get involved in the European War? So in this next slide, we're going to talk about isolationism, the Neutrality Acts, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the Lend-Lease Act, where we made a lot of money, and the Atlantic Charter. And you can see in this picture, this is Winston Churchill, this is Franklin Delano Roosevelt, this is some unnamed military official, and this is the Atlantic Charter talks. So, in the 1930s, the United States had kept out of international affairs in order to focus its energy on saving problems caused by the Great Depression. This policy was called isolationism, and isolationism sprang from a strong desire to avoid getting involved in another world war. The United States stayed away from the entangling alliances of the type that led to World War I. From 1935 to 1937, Congress passed a series of neutrality acts that forbid the United States from providing weapons or loans to nations at war. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt understood the public's desire to stay isolated, but he also realized that the United States could not stand idly by and ignore the turmoil in Europe. As Nazi aggression increased in the late 1930s, public opinion started to shift. Most Americans still wanted to keep from getting involved, but they wanted to find a way to help England and France stand up to Germany. Less than a month after the Nazis invaded Poland, FDR asked Congress to revise the Neutrality Act so that the United States could sell weapons to the Allies. After his election in 1940, FDR introduces a new policy known as the Lend-Lease Act. The Lend-Lease was designed to continue the flow of military aid to England. The British government by this time was nearly bankrupt, so FDR proposed to provide supplies without asking for payment in return. He sold the policy to the American public by using a clever metaphor, stating that if your neighbor's house is on fire, you don't sell him your hose, you lend it to him. Despite opposition from isolationists, Congress passed the Lend-Lease Act in 1941, March of 1941, provided that the U.S. would lend or lease weapons and supplies to any country whose defense was vital to the United States. In August of 1941, Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Churchill secretly met on a warship off the coast of Newfoundland, agreeing to a set of war aims called the Atlantic Charter. The Atlantic Charter outlined the need for collective security, free elections, self-determination, post-war disarmament, and economic cooperation. So, the U.S. is coming to the aid of Britain. Will it be too little too late? Will it be just enough in time? In our next slide, we see Germany taking France. We have a picture of Adolf Hitler and some of his aides in front of the Eiffel Tower, and we have on the other side a Frenchman crying as the German troops march into Paris. So following Dunkirk, France was left virtually undefended. In early June of 1940, the Italians and the Nazis had declared war against France and Great Britain, and they attacked France from the south. On June 14th, Paris fell to the Germans, and on June 20th, 1940, France surrendered to Germany. France General Charles de Gaulle fled to London, and from there he set up a government in exile and named himself the leader of the Free French. De Gaulle's government in England worked with clandestine or secret guerrilla forces in France to free the country from the Germans. This effort was known as the Resistance, also known as the French Resistance, and France isn't going to give up. They're going to keep fighting against the Germans as long as they can. Now, switching back to England, the Battle of Britain. You can see pictures on the left here. These are from the Germans bombing London, the Germans bombing England. This is an air raid shelter in London. These were located underground supposedly safe from bombs that would do this to these buildings. And with much of Europe under Nazi control, Hitler turns his attention to England. His goal was to disable the Royal Air Force, also known as the RAF, and then launch a land assault against the island nation. In June 1940, the German Luftwaffe, or German Air Force, embarked on a sustained air campaign targeting England's biggest cities, especially the capital of London. The Battle of Britain lasts almost a year. It lasts until May 1941. Many civilians die, hundreds of buildings are reduced to rubble, but the British ultimately prevailed because of several factors. One, the development of radar, a new technology that allowed the British to know the number, speed, and direction of incoming enemy warplanes. The British anti-aircraft guns could knock these warplanes down out of the sky, and they inflicted heavy losses on the Luftwaffe. Two, the skill of the Royal Air Force in defending the country kept the losses from being more severe. British fighters, air fighters, ultimately managed to overcome and shoot down their German counterparts. Three, since most German attacks took place at night, the British government imposed a total blackout to ensure that the Luftwaffe could not use the lights from England's buildings to help them locate targets to bomb. Civilians used thick black curtains or black paint to light-proof their windows, and cities turned off their streetlights at night. In addition, the government set up several public air raid shelters that saved thousands of civilian lives. In the Battle of Britain, the German Luftwaffe lost a total of 1,733 aircraft, while the Royal Air Force lost only 915 aircraft. Between September of 1940 and May of 1941, Germany dropped more than 35,000 tons of bombs. London alone was attacked 19 times with over 18,000 tons of bombs. When it became clear that Britain could not be subdued by bombing alone, Hitler changed his focus to Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. So, Battle of Britain, very important. It shows a weakness in Hitler's policies, and it shows that the English weren't going to be so easy to defeat. So, next we see an inspiring quote from Winston Churchill: "Never was so much owed by so many to so few," praising the Royal Air Force as the saviors of England, which this describes the sentiment of the population of England for the Royal Air Force's defense of the air raids. And then the next slide talks about Germany invading Russia. We see a German soldier in this photo with a hand grenade moving forward into Russia. Hitler's obsession with expanding eastward would lead him to break his treaty with Stalin. In June 1941, the Germans began Operation Barbarossa. Early on, military strategists predict that the Soviet army would be defeated in less than 2 months. The ensuing campaign was one of the most deadly in world history and lasted 4 years, as the German army attempts to destroy the Soviet Union's Red Army. With the German invasion of the Soviet Union, Winston Churchill announced that all who resist Nazi domination shall have our aid. So all of a sudden the Soviet Union becomes an ally to the US. This next slide talks about Japanese aggression and Pearl Harbor. I am going to bump this to the next lecture. This will end our lecture. I know it's a lot of talking and not much writing on the slides, so feel free to go back and listen to it a couple of times. Make sure you're recording important dates and important people. I'm trying to make these quizzes so that they can't be Googled. You have to listen and you have to understand what's in this lecture. Thank you for listening. Have a nice day.